The officer harassed a senior black man in the park, but when a young journalist started filming, Harold Johnson had always found solace in Oakwood Park. At 72, the retired high school history teacher treasured his daily walks through the tree-lined paths, where the rustle of leaves and chirping of birds provided a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. His weathered hands, marked by decades of grading papers and gesturing at chalkboards, now gripped a polished wooden cane, more a companion than a necessity. Born and raised in the small town of Millbrook, Harold had witnessed the ebb and flow of social change throughout his lifetime. He had marched for civil rights in his youth, integrated the local high school as one of its first black teachers, and mentored countless students over his 40-year career. His salt-and-pepper hair and kind brown eyes spoke of wisdom earned through years of both struggle and triumph. On this crisp autumn morning, Harold set out for his usual stroll, his tweed jacket and flat cap a testament to his old-school sensibilities. As he made his way along the familiar path, he nodded and smiled at the other early risers, joggers, dog walkers, and fellow retirees. Many knew him by name, respect evident in their greetings. Unbeknownst to Harold, this ordinary morning was about to become extraordinary. Officer Michael Brennan, a recent transfer to the Millbrook Police Department, was also in the park. At 35, Brennan was a stark contrast to Harold. Young, brash, and carrying a chip on his shoulder from years of working in a larger, more crime-ridden city. His transition to small-town policing had been rough, his aggressive tactics often at odds with the community-oriented approach favored by his new colleagues. As Harold rounded a bend in the path, he was unaware of the eyes watching him. Among the morning park-goers was Sarah Chen, a 28-year-old journalist for the local newspaper. Armed with her ever-present smartphone and a keen eye for a story, Sarah had been working on a series about community relations in Millbrook. Little did she know that she was about to witness an incident that would shake the town to its core and test the values it held dear. The stage was set. Harold, the respected elder, Brennan, the out-of-place officer, and Sarah, the watchful observer. As the morning sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting dappled shadows on the path, the park seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when their lives would intersect in a way none of them could have anticipated. The serenity of the morning shattered like glass as Officer Brennan's voice cut through the air. "Hey you, stop right there," he barked, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered weapon. Harold, startled by the sudden commotion, turned slowly to face the approaching officer. Confusion furrowed his brow as he tried to understand why he was being addressed in such a manner. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice calm and steady despite the unexpected confrontation. Brennan closed the distance between them with quick, aggressive strides. "I've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. What are you doing here?" His eyes narrowed as he scanned Harold from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the cane as if it might somehow be a concealed weapon. "I'm taking my morning walk as I do every day," Harold replied, his posture straightening slightly. Years of facing down unruly students had taught him the importance of maintaining composure in tense situations. "I've been coming to this park for decades." Officer Brennan's jaw clenched, clearly unsatisfied with the response. "Let me see some ID," he demanded, holding out his hand expectantly. Harold's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and indignation crossing his face. "May I ask why?" "I'm not aware of any law requiring me to carry identification while walking in a public park." The officer's demeanor shifted, his body language becoming more aggressive. "Listen, old man, I don't have time for games. Either show me some ID or I'll have to take you in for obstruction." As the confrontation escalated, Sarah Chen, who had been discreetly observing from a nearby bench, began to film the interaction on her smartphone. Her journalistic instincts told her that this was more than just a routine stop. There was a story unfolding before her eyes. Harold, aware of the growing tension, slowly reached into his jacket pocket. "Officer, I want to cooperate, but I also want to understand why I'm being treated like a criminal for simply existing in this space." Brennan's hand tightened on his weapon, his voice rising. "Just shut up and show me the ID. I'm not here to debate with you." The commotion began to draw attention from other park-goers. A young couple out for a jog slowed to a stop, watching the scene with concern. An elderly woman walking her dog clutched her pet closer, her eyes wide with worry. Harold, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, produced his wallet and handed over his driver's license. As Brennan snatched it from his hand, Harold spoke again, his voice low but firm. "I'd like to know the specific reason for this stop, officer. I believe I have that right." Brennan glared at Harold, his frustration evident. "I told you, there have been reports of suspicious activity. You fit the description." "And what description is that?" Harold asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. "An elderly black man taking a walk in broad daylight?" The officer's face flushed red with anger. "That's it. You're coming with me. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." As Brennan reached for his handcuffs, the situation teetering on the brink of physical confrontation, Sarah decided she could no longer remain a silent observer. She stood up, her phone still recording, and called out, "Excuse me, officer. I've been filming this interaction. Can you please explain why you're detaining this man?" Brennan's head snapped around, his eyes widening as he realized the entire encounter had been captured on video. For a moment, uncertainty flashed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of authority. "This is a police matter. Stay back and mind your own business," he growled at Sarah. But the damage was done. The presence of a witness, armed with video evidence, had changed the dynamic of the situation. Other parkgoers, emboldened by Sarah's intervention, began to gather closer, murmuring their disapproval of the officer's actions. In that moment, as tensions reached a boiling point, the peaceful morning in Oakwood Park had transformed into a powder keg of racial tension, abuse of authority, and community activism. The actions taken in the next few moments would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, rippling out to touch the entire town of Millbrook. As the confrontation in Oakwood Park teetered on the edge of chaos, a new voice cut through the tension. "Officer Brennan, stand down immediately." The commanding tone belonged to Captain Elena Rodriguez, Brennan's superior officer, who had been alerted to the situation by a concerned citizen. Captain Rodriguez strode purposefully towards the scene, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic. She took in the situation with a quick, practiced glance. Harold, still dignified despite his obvious distress. Brennan, red-faced and defensive, and the growing crowd of onlookers, many with phones out recording the incident. "What's going on here?" Rodriguez demanded, her voice stern but controlled. Before Brennan could respond, Sarah Chen stepped forward, her journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. "Captain, I have video evidence of Officer Brennan harassing this gentleman without cause. He demanded ID and threatened arrest simply for walking in the park." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as she turned to Brennan. "Is this true, officer?" Brennan stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating under his superior's scrutiny. I was responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area. This man fit the description." "What description?" Rodriguez pressed, her tone sharp. As Brennan struggled to formulate a response, a revelation dawned on Harold. He remembered a conversation he'd overheard at the local diner just days ago, whispers about a new neighborhood watch program that some residents had started, one that seemed to view any unfamiliar face, particularly those of color, as inherently suspicious. "Captain," Harold spoke up, his voice steady, "I believe I might know the source of these reports. There's been talk in town of a new citizens patrol group. I fear they may be targeting individuals based on race rather than any actual suspicious behavior." This information landed like a bombshell. Rodriguez's expression hardened as she processed the implications. If true, this wasn't just a case of one officer's misconduct. It pointed to a larger issue of systemic bias and community division. Sarah, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed further. "Captain Rodriguez, are you aware of any official sanction for this neighborhood watch group? And has the department been acting on their reports without verifying the credibility of the information?" The questions hung in the air, heavy with implication. Rodriguez looked from Harold to Brennan, then to the crowd of witnesses. In that moment, she realized that this incident was a tipping point, one that could either tear the community apart or become a catalyst for much-needed change. "Officer Brennan, you're suspended pending a full investigation," Rodriguez announced, her decision swift and unequivocal. Turning to Harold, her tone softened. "Sir, I apologize for this unacceptable treatment. I assure you this will be thoroughly investigated." As Brennan was led away, the gravity of the situation settled over the park. What had started as a simple morning walk had unveiled a complex web of racial profiling, unchecked authority, and community vigilantism. The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd, sparking hushed conversations and concerned glances. For Harold, the discovery brought a mix of vindication and sadness. The progress he had fought for throughout his life was still fragile, still in need of constant vigilance and protection. As he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, some shocked, some angry, some ashamed, he knew that Millbrook stood at a crossroads. The path forward would depend on how the community chose to confront the uncomfortable truths that had been laid bare in Oakwood Park that morning. In the days following the incident at Oakwood Park, Harold Johnson found himself at the center of a storm he never sought. His phone rang incessantly with calls from local media, community leaders, and concerned citizens. The video of his confrontation with Officer Brennan had gone viral, igniting debates about racial profiling and police conduct far beyond the borders of Millbrook. As Harold sat in his living room, surrounded by stacks of newspapers featuring his story and printouts of online articles dissecting the incident, he faced a crucial decision. He could retreat from the spotlight, allow the authorities to handle the investigation, and try to return to his quiet life. Or he could step forward, use his voice and experience to address the deeper issues that the incident had exposed. After a night of soul-searching, Harold made his choice. He would not be silent. He would not allow this moment to pass without pushing for real, lasting change in Millbrook. The consequences of his decision were immediate and far-reaching. Harold agreed to an interview with Sarah Chen, the journalist who had filmed the incident. In a front-page article that sent shockwaves through the community, Harold spoke candidly about his experiences with racism, both overt and subtle, throughout his life in Millbrook. He called for a comprehensive review of police practices, increased community oversight, and a town-wide conversation about racial bias. The article polarized the town. Many residents, particularly people of color and younger citizens, rallied behind Harold, organizing protests and calling for Officer Brennan's permanent dismissal. They saw Harold as a hero, a voice for the voiceless, and a catalyst for long-overdue change. Others, however, viewed Harold's actions as divisive. Some longtime residents, uncomfortable with the spotlight now shining on Millbrook's racial issues, accused him of exaggerating the problem. The local police union released a statement defending Officer Brennan, claiming he was a scapegoat for larger societal issues. Harold's decision also had personal consequences. Old friendships were strained as some of his peers criticized him for stirring up trouble. He received anonymous threatening letters, forcing him to install a security system in his home. The stress took a toll on his health, exacerbating his arthritis and causing sleepless nights. Despite these challenges, Harold pressed on. He accepted invitations to speak at community forums, church gatherings, and even the local high school where he had once taught. At each event, he shared his story and urged attendees to examine their own biases and work towards a more inclusive community. One particularly consequential meeting occurred when Harold agreed to sit down with Mayor Linda Thompson. Initially defensive about the negative attention Millbrook was receiving, the mayor was moved by Harold's sincerity and his deep love for the town. By the end of their conversation, she had committed to forming a task force on community police relations, with Harold as a key advisor. This decision by the mayor, however, further inflamed tensions with the police department. Some officers, feeling unfairly maligned, began a work slowdown in protest. Crime rates ticked up slightly, leading to heated debates about public safety versus accountability. As weeks turned into months, the consequences of Harold's decision continued to ripple through Millbrook. The town became a case study for national media outlets exploring issues of race and policing in small-town America. Researchers from nearby universities reached out, wanting to study Millbrook's approach to addressing systemic bias. Perhaps the most significant consequence came in the form of a lawsuit. With the support of a civil rights organization, Harold filed a federal lawsuit against the Millbrook Police Department, Officer Brennan, and the town itself. The suit alleged a pattern of discriminatory policing and sought not just damages, but mandated reforms in police training and practices. The lawsuit divided the town even further. Some saw it as a necessary step to force change, while others viewed it as a betrayal, airing the town's dirty laundry in public and potentially costing taxpayers millions. Through it all, Harold remained committed to his course of action. Each morning he would return to Oakwood Park for his walk, a symbolic reclaiming of the space where his ordeal had begun. Some days, supporters would join him in solidarity. Other days he would face cold stares and muttered comments from those who saw him as a troublemaker. As the months wore on, Harold's decision to speak out had transformed him from a respected but relatively unknown retired teacher into a reluctant symbol of the fight against racial injustice. His life had become more complicated, more stressful, and in some ways, more isolated. Yet each time he doubted his choice, he would remember the words of one of his former students, now a young mother, who had approached him after a community meeting. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for fighting this fight. Because of you, my children might grow up in a town where they're seen for who they are, not judged by the color of their skin." In those moments, Harold knew that regardless of the personal cost, he had made the right decision. The path forward was difficult and uncertain, but he was committed to seeing it through, for the sake of future generations and the soul of Millbrook itself. As Harold's story dominated the headlines and divided the town, a secondary plot was unfolding in the shadows. Sarah Chen, the young journalist who had captured the fateful incident on video, found herself drawn deeper into an investigation that went far beyond a single act of racial profiling. Intrigued by Harold's mention of the unofficial Neighborhood Watch Group, Sarah began digging into its origins and operations. Her research led her to discover a private online forum where members of the group shared suspicious activity. Reports. What she found was disturbing. The vast majority of reports targeted people of color, often for nothing more than walking in nice neighborhoods or shopping in upscale stores. Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn when she received an anonymous tip about financial irregularities in the police department's budget. The tipster, claiming to be a disillusioned officer, suggested that funds allocated for community outreach programs had been diverted to militarize the force with surplus equipment. As Sarah delved deeper, she uncovered a web of connections between influential town members, the police union, and the company supplying the military-grade equipment. At the center of this web was Councilman Robert Vaughn, a vocal supporter of tough-on-crime policies and a childhood friend of Officer Brennan. Sarah's pursuit of the story put her at odds with her editor at the Millbrook Gazette, who worried about alienating advertisers and powerful figures in town. Undeterred, Sarah continued her investigation, often working late into the night and following leads on her own time. Her persistence paid off when she managed to secure an interview with a former member of the Neighborhood Watch Group. The woman, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that the group had been encouraged and informally supported by certain elements within the police department, including Officer Brennan. As Sarah pieced together the connections, she realized she was uncovering a story much bigger than Harold's incident. It pointed to a systemic issue of racial bias, abuse of power, and corruption that ran deep in Millbrook's institutions. However, her investigation didn't go unnoticed. Sarah began receiving anonymous threats, warning her to drop the story. Her apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. A clear attempt at intimidation. Despite the pressure, Sarah refused to back down, driven by her commitment to uncovering the truth and her growing friendship with Harold. The secondary plot reached a critical point when Sarah obtained documents suggesting that Councilman Vaughn had pushed for policies that disproportionately targeted minority neighborhoods for aggressive policing. These policies coincided with lucrative contracts being awarded to security companies with ties to Vaughn's family. As Sarah prepared to publish her findings, she found an unexpected ally in Captain Rodriguez, who had become disillusioned with the department's resistance to change. Rodriguez provided Sarah with internal memos that corroborated much of her investigation. This secondary plot added layers of complexity to the main story, revealing that Harold's experience was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of systemic issues in Millbrook. It also highlighted the power of investigative journalism and the courage required to stand up against entrenched interests. As Sarah's investigation progressed, it became clear that the fight for justice in Millbrook would require more than addressing a single incident of racial profiling. It would necessitate a complete overhaul of the town's power structures and a reckoning with long-ignored issues of bias and corruption. In the midst of the turmoil engulfing Millbrook, an unlikely friendship blossomed between Harold Johnson and Sarah Chen. Their relationship, born from the crucible of conflict, grew to become a source of strength and inspiration for both of them. Initially, their interactions were purely professional. Sarah would interview Harold for her articles, and Harold would provide quotes and insights into the ongoing struggle for justice. But as the weeks passed, they found themselves drawn to each other's company, recognizing a shared commitment to truth and fairness. Their friendship deepened one rainy afternoon when Sarah arrived at Harold's home for a scheduled interview. She found him poring over old photo albums, tears in his eyes. Sensing her presence, Harold looked up and smiled sadly. "I was just remembering," he said, gesturing to a faded photograph of a young black man in a teacher's suit, standing proudly in front of Millbrook High. "That was my first day as a teacher here. I thought we'd come so far since then. Now, I'm not so sure." Sarah sat beside him, her reporter's notebook forgotten. For the next few hours, Harold shared stories of his life. The triumphs and struggles, the moments of joy and heartbreak. Sarah listened, not as a journalist, but as a friend, offering comfort and understanding. From that day forward, their relationship evolved. They began meeting regularly, not just for interviews, but for coffee, walks in the park, and long conversations about life, justice, and the future of Millbrook. Harold found in Sarah a kindred spirit, someone who shared his passion for social justice and his belief in the power of truth to effect change. For Sarah, Harold became a mentor, offering wisdom gained from a lifetime of fighting for equality. Their friendship didn't go unnoticed in the small town. Some viewed it with suspicion, accusing Sarah of losing her objectivity as a journalist. Others saw it as a symbol of hope, a bridge between generations and races, proving that understanding and empathy could flourish even in times of conflict. As the legal battle over Harold's lawsuit intensified, Sarah became a source of emotional support for the older man. She would often drop by his house with home-cooked meals, knowing that the stress was taking a toll on his health. In return, Harold became a sounding board for Sarah's investigative work, offering insights and encouragement as she delved deeper into Millbrook's hidden power structures. Their friendship was tested when Sarah uncovered information that implicated some of Harold's old acquaintances in the town's systemic issues. Harold struggled with feelings of betrayal and disillusionment, but Sarah's unwavering support helped him navigate these complex emotions. One pivotal moment in their relationship came during a town hall meeting about police reform. As Harold stood to speak, he was met with jeers and insults from a group of protesters who viewed him as a troublemaker. Sarah, without hesitation, stood up beside him, her presence a silent but powerful statement of solidarity. The gesture moved Harold deeply, reinforcing his resolve to continue the fight. As months passed, their friendship became a cornerstone of the movement for change in Millbrook. They were often seen together at community events, Harold's dignified presence complemented by Sarah's youthful energy. Their dynamic inspired others, particularly young people, to get involved in the push for social justice. Their relationship also had a profound impact on their personal lives. Harold, who had been feeling increasingly isolated as old friendships strained under the weight of controversy, found new purpose and connection through his bond with Sarah. For Sarah, Harold's influence helped her grow not just as a journalist, but as a person, teaching her the value of patience, perseverance, and seeing the long arc of history. As the story of Millbrook's transformation unfolded, the friendship between Harold and Sarah became a symbol of what was possible when people reached across divides of age, race, and experience to find common ground. Their relationship, forged in the heat of conflict, stood as a testament to the power of human connection to overcome prejudice and inspire change. In quiet moments, as they sat on Harold's porch watching the sun set over Millbrook, both reflected on how an unexpected encounter in a park had led to a friendship that was changing not just their lives, but the very fabric of their community. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, connections between people could light the way forward. The tensions that had been building in Millbrook for months finally erupted on a sweltering summer evening during a town council meeting to discuss police reform. The community center was packed, with citizens spilling out onto the street, their voices a cacophony of anger, fear, and hope. Harold and Sarah arrived together, making their way through the crowd to find seats near the front. The air was thick with anticipation and the underlying current of potential violence. On one side of the room, supporters of police reform, many wearing T-shirts with Harold's face and the slogan "Justice for All," chanted for change. On the other, a group led by Officer Brennan's family and fellow officers held signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Support our police." Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, but her words were immediately drowned out by shouts from both sides. As she struggled to regain control, Councilman Vaughn stood up, his face red with anger. "This has gone on long enough," he bellowed. "We're here because one man couldn't follow a simple police order. Now our whole town is being torn apart." The room erupted in chaos. Supporters of Harold surged forward, while Vaughn's allies rose to meet them. In the midst of the melee, Sarah spotted Officer Brennan slipping out a side door, a suspicious bulge under his jacket. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed Harold's arm. "Something's not right," she whispered urgently. "We need to follow Brennan." They managed to exit the building just in time to see Brennan duck into an alley behind the community center. As they cautiously approached, they heard hushed voices and the rustling of papers. "This is our chance," Brennan was saying. "With everyone distracted, we can get rid of the evidence. Once these documents are gone, there's nothing to tie us to the neighborhood watch or the equipment purchases." Harold and Sarah exchanged shocked glances. This was the proof they needed to expose the corruption Sarah had been investigating. But before they could react, a voice rang out behind them. "Don't move." It was Captain Rodriguez, her gun drawn. "Officer Brennan, step away from those documents." What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, but would be seared into the memories of all present for years to come. Brennan, panic evident on his face, reached for his weapon. Harold, acting on instinct honed from years in the classroom, stepped in front of Sarah to shield her. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. When the echo of gunfire faded, Brennan lay on the ground, his weapon unfired, a look of shock frozen on his face. Captain Rodriguez stood with her smoking gun still raised, her expression a mix of determination and regret. And Harold Johnson, the man whose morning walk had set this entire chain of events in motion, slumped against the alley wall, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. "No!" Sarah's anguished cry cut through the sudden silence. She rushed to Harold's side, pressing her hands against his wound. "Help! Someone call an ambulance!" As sirens wailed in the distance and the crowd from the meeting spilled into the street, drawn by the sound of gunshots, the alley behind the community center became the epicenter of Millbrook's reckoning. The documents scattered on the ground, the fallen officer, the wounded civil rights leader. All of it a stark tableau of the town's pain, corruption, and the violent cost of change. In that climactic moment, as Harold's life hung in the balance, the future of Millbrook teetered on a knife's edge. The path forward would depend on how the community chose to respond to this explosive culmination of months of tension and decades of unaddressed issues. In the chaotic aftermath of the shooting, Millbrook found itself thrust into a national spotlight it never wanted. As Harold Johnson fought for his life in the hospital, the town grappled with the violent culmination of its long-simmering racial tensions and corrupt practices. The days following the incident saw a flurry of activity. Mayor Thompson, recognizing the gravity of the situation, called for an emergency session of the town council. In a packed meeting hall, under the glare of national news cameras, she announced a series of immediate actions. A full, independent investigation into the shooting and the circumstances leading up to it. The suspension of all officers implicated in Sarah Chen's exposé, pending the results of the investigation. The formation of a civilian oversight committee for the police department. A town-wide series of listening sessions to address racial bias and community police relations. These measures, while welcomed by many, were met with skepticism by others who felt they were too little, too late. Protests continued daily outside the police station and town hall, with demonstrators demanding more sweeping reforms and the immediate dismissal of all implicated officers. Sarah Chen, torn between her role as a journalist and her personal involvement in the case, found herself at the center of the storm. Her investigative work had blown the lid off the corruption in Millbrook, but now she was faced with the gut-wrenching reality that her friend and mentor lay in critical condition as a result. In an attempt to bridge the divide, Sarah proposed a town hall meeting where all sides could air their grievances and work towards a resolution. The idea was met with initial resistance, particularly from the police union and supporters of Officer Brennan, who felt they were being unfairly vilified. However, with the backing of Mayor Thompson and several community leaders, the event was scheduled. The town hall, held in the high school gymnasium, was a tense affair. Security was tight, with state troopers brought in to maintain order. The room was divided, literally and figuratively, with supporters of police reform on one side and those backing the police on the other. Mayor Thompson opened the session with a plea for civility and open-mindedness. "We are all Millbrook," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We cannot let this tragedy define us. We must find a way forward, together." Over the next several hours, speakers from all sides of the issue took the microphone. There were moments of raw emotion, as family members of those affected by racial profiling shared their stories. There were heated exchanges, as defenders of the police argued that a few bad apples shouldn't taint the entire force. A pivotal moment came when Captain Rodriguez, still under investigation for the shooting of Officer Brennan, stepped up to speak. The room fell silent as she began. "I've served this community for 20 years, she said, her voice steady but her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I believed I was doing the right thing, protecting and serving. But I've come to realize that our system is broken. We've lost the trust of those we're meant to protect, and rebuilding that trust must be our top priority." Her words seemed to shift the energy in the room. Even those who had been staunchly pro-police began to murmur in agreement. It was a reminder that behind the uniforms and badges were human beings capable of reflection and change. As the meeting progressed, concrete proposals began to emerge. Ideas ranged from increased diversity in police hiring to mandatory de-escalation training, from community policing initiatives to a review of all arrest data to identify patterns of racial bias. Sarah Chen, who had been documenting the proceedings, was called upon to present her findings. With a heavy heart, she laid out the evidence of corruption and racial profiling she had uncovered. Her presentation was met with gasps of shock from some and nods of grim confirmation from others. As the town hall neared its conclusion, a surprise speaker took the stage. It was Harold Johnson's daughter, Lisa, who had flown in from out of state to be by her father's side. Her presence brought a hush over the crowd. "My father," she began, her voice quavering, "has always believed in the power of education and understanding to overcome hate and fear. He would want us to use this moment not to further divide our community, but to come together and create real, lasting change." Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone of the human cost of the conflict and the importance of finding a resolution. As the town hall ended, there was a sense that while the road ahead would be difficult, a first step had been taken. Mayor Thompson announced the formation of a task force, comprising members from all sides of the debate, to draft a comprehensive plan for police reform and community healing. The conflict was far from resolved, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope in Millbrook. As people filed out of the gymnasium, there were handshakes across the aisle, exchanges of contact information, and promises to continue the dialogue. Outside, the summer sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the town. The warm evening air carried with it a sense of cautious optimism. The real work was just beginning, but the seeds of resolution had been planted. The turning point for Millbrook came not in a grand gesture or a sweeping policy change, but in a series of small human moments that began to reshape the town's fabric. It started with a vigil outside the hospital where Harold Johnson was recovering. What began as a small gathering of his supporters swelled into a diverse crowd of hundreds. People who had been on opposite sides of the police reform debate found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder, united in their hope for Harold's recovery and their desire for a peaceful resolution to the town's conflicts. During the vigil, Officer Martinez, one of the younger members of the police force, approached Lisa Johnson. With tears in his eyes, he apologized for the pain her family had endured and asked how he could be part of the solution. The sincere exchange, captured on video by an onlooker, went viral, becoming a symbol of the potential for understanding and reconciliation. Inspired by this moment, other officers began reaching out to community members they had previously viewed with suspicion or indifference. Coffee shops became impromptu meeting grounds where officers and citizens engaged in honest, often difficult conversations about race, policing, and community. Meanwhile, the task force formed after the town hall meeting began to make real progress. Comprised of a diverse group of citizens, including former skeptics of police reform, they worked tirelessly to draft a comprehensive plan for change. Their proposals, which included increased transparency in police operations, mandatory bias training, and community oversight, were met with cautious optimism from all sides. Sarah Chen, continuing her role as both journalist and activist, used her platform to highlight these positive developments. Her articles, once focused on exposing corruption, now told stories of community members working together to rebuild trust and create a more just Millbrook. The new direction became clear when Mayor Thompson, with the backing of the task force and a majority of the town council, announced a pilot program for community policing. This initiative would pair officers with community leaders for joint patrols, fostering understanding and cooperation. As these changes began to take root, there was a palpable shift in Millbrook's atmosphere. The tension that had gripped the town for months began to ease. People who had been afraid to walk in certain neighborhoods now felt more comfortable doing so. Officers reported feeling more connected to the community they served. This turning point didn't erase the pain of the past or solve all of Millbrook's problems overnight. But it marked the beginning of a new chapter for the town, one focused on healing, understanding, and progress. As Millbrook embarked on this new direction, the eyes of the nation remained fixed on the small town, watching to see if it could truly transform itself and perhaps serve as a model for other communities grappling with similar issues. 6 months after the shooting, Harold Johnson sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the first snowfall of the winter blanket Oakwood Park. His physical recovery had been slow and challenging, but it was the emotional and spiritual journey that had truly transformed him. As he reflected on the tumultuous events that had unfolded since that fateful morning in the park, Harold felt a complex mix of emotions. There was sorrow for the pain the town had endured, pride in the progress that had been made, and a renewed sense of purpose that burned brighter than ever. "You know, Sarah," he said to the young journalist seated across from him, her ever-present notebook in hand, "I used to think my fighting days were behind me, that I'd done my part in the struggle for equality. But life has a way of calling you back to the front lines when you least expect it." Sarah nodded, her own experiences over the past months having matured her both as a reporter and as a person. "You've inspired so many people, Harold, myself included. How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Harold was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I feel hopeful," he finally said. "Not naive hope, mind you. I've seen too much in my years to believe that change comes easy. But I see real progress happening in Millbrook. People are talking to each other, really listening, maybe for the first time." He gestured to a stack of letters on the side table. "I get messages every day from young people in town telling me how they've been inspired to get involved in community organizing, to pursue careers in law or social work. That's the real change, Sarah. It's in the hearts and minds of the next generation." Sarah smiled, thinking of her own growth. Her experience had deepened her commitment to investigative journalism, but also taught her the importance of highlighting solutions, not just problems. "And what about you, Harold? How have you changed through all this?" Harold chuckled softly. "Oh, I've changed all right. I've learned that an old dog can indeed learn new tricks. I've had to confront my own biases, my own assumptions about people. I've learned the value of social media and technology in organizing movements, thanks in large part to you and your millennial friends." His expression grew more serious. "But most importantly, I've learned that the work is never truly done. Each generation has to fight its own battles, face its own challenges. Our job is to give them the tools and the courage to face those challenges head-on." As they continued to talk, it became clear that Harold's ordeal had not broken him, but rather had rekindled a fire within him. He spoke of plans to start a mentorship program for at-risk youth, to work with the police department on community outreach initiatives, and to continue sharing his story with anyone who would listen. Sarah, too, reflected on her own journey. From an ambitious young reporter chasing a story, she had become a respected voice in the community and a bridge between different factions. Her articles now focused not just on exposing injustice, but on highlighting the difficult day-to-day work of building a more equitable society. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the town in a layer of pristine white, both Harold and Sarah felt a sense of renewal. The events of the past months had been painful and challenging, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to the cause of justice. The growth they had experienced, both individually and as a community, was not an endpoint, but a new beginning. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of individuals to effect change, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As winter gave way to spring, Millbrook began to show signs of rebirth that went beyond the blooming flowers in Oakwood Park. The changes that had been set in motion were taking root, transforming the town in ways both subtle and profound. On a warm Saturday morning, Harold Johnson, leaning on his cane but standing tall, led a diverse group of community members on a walk through the very park where his ordeal had begun. Among the group were police officers, young activists, longtime residents, and newcomers to Millbrook. Their animated conversations and shared laughter were a testament to the bridges that had been built. Sarah Chen, walking beside Harold, couldn't help but marvel at the scene. She thought back to that tense morning months ago when she had witnessed an act of injustice. Who could have imagined that it would lead to this moment of unity and hope? As the group paused by the lake, Harold addressed them, his voice strong and clear. "Look around you," he said. "This is what progress looks like. It's not perfect. We still have a long way to go, but we're walking that road together now." His words resonated with everyone present, reinforcing the central theme that had emerged from Millbrook's journey. Change is possible when people come together, confront uncomfortable truths, and commit to creating a more just and equitable community. As the walk concluded and the group dispersed, there was a shared sense that while the story of Millbrook's transformation was far from over, a new chapter had begun. It was a chapter filled with challenge and promise, a continuing testament to the power of individual courage and collective action to overcome even the most deeply rooted injustices.